A very good evening to you and welcome to this edition of the People's Business Live. Cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. It's an often heard refrain that in some ways has gotten even louder since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, whenever things get tight globally, you can bet that Ms. Brathwaite from Pie Corner and her household will no doubt feel it. And tonight we have an esteemed panel to help us to have a conversation on the cost of living. To help us do that, the Honorable Minister of Energy, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, Kerrie Symmonds, President of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Anthony Branker, Chief Executive Officer of the Barbados Agricultural Society, James Paul, and President of the Barbados Manufacturers Association, John Marshall. We're back after the break with the discussion. Welcome back. Now, before we get into the full discussion, let's hear from the people. For years, many Barbadians have found issue with retail prices across several sectors in Barbados, and with the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbating the financial standing of the average Barbadian, some are suggesting that more can be done to ease the burden.
When you go into the market, the prices will be real high. Everything will be real expensive. And it ain't easy. I don't know what the government could really do. They could try to probably get more work for people.
Practically everything comes through the port. I honestly believe that some leeway could be given to the level of customs duties that are levied.
I think the cost of living is crazy here at the moment. Food is so expensive. Petrol fuel is really, really expensive. It's always been really high, but I would say the past year or so it's gotten out of control.
They need to monitor what the shops and supermarkets and various places are doing, because I really do think that, basically people are just doing their own thing.
As a farmer, as a vendor, I got multiple businesses, and it's real hard right now. I won't say hard on me, but hard on the people out there, because any day people ain't got no money, right? And then people getting more taxes put on them, and every day things going up, and the quality of food that they're bringing, I'm charging fuel for relatively grade B food, right? And I'm charging grade A prices.
I would suggest that the government sort of looking to those business people who have to import products on the island and are facing these challenges, if they can make it easier for them in terms of the VAT, if they can sort of have some sort of discussion where they could bring the prices down a little bit for them so that they can clear at the ports. Because the little man on the ground is suffering in terms of when we go, we have to pay an exorbitant price for the materials we need because they are struggling to get these stuff in. Their price has gone up. So it's a challenge.
There you have it, the voices of the people. And I want to get the discussion going with you, Minister Symmonds. You have heard the voices of the people. Obviously, we're not in ordinary times. COVID-19 has been a major game changer. But is there anything to your view, let's get this discussion going that way, where we can still get those prices that get to the man at the bottom, so to speak, the ordinary Bajan, to get those prices lower? in terms of the cost of living?
Well, first of all, good evening, and let me tell you that I welcome the opportunity to discuss these matters with you. And I hope that we can do the price movement discussion in its entirety, not just food, but the commodities prices and the prices of petroleum products, etc. It impacts every household. There's no question about that, and it is impacting the most vulnerable in our community more seriously and more severely. I take the point that the people who you interviewed just now have made. I think they're 100% correct with respect to the observations they have made, because government is not entirely powerless in this matter, even though, as I've had to explain repeatedly, in large measure we are price takers. But there are some hard realities that we are facing as a result, first of all, of the COVID situation. In 2019 or 2018, for example, if we wanted to source a container out of Asia, which is where a lot of the commodities, not necessarily food, but the stuff you find in your hardware stores, the stuff that you find if you're furnishing your house, etc., coming out of Asia, a small container may have costed about $2,500 Today, as a result of dislocation in shipping lines, a variety of other logistical challenges induced by COVID. For example, boats arriving at ports where there is hardly anybody working if the port is actually open at all because of the challenges of COVID on the receiving end. You have situations where containers are now costing $10,000 for a small one, that's 10,000 US, and for larger ones, maybe upwards of $12,000 or $13,000. That's just the empty container being sourced, first of all. Above and beyond that, we have a need to have a conversation, which is very mature in Barbados, in my judgment, and is prepared to encompass all of the players. I hear the discussions about government, and I want to engage on that during the course of this call, because we have been in a position where we benefited from a lot of research and input from people in the private sector working with us as we have tried to wrestle this to the ground. In fact, I owe a debt of gratitude to Mr. Branker, who is on this call, because he has been a partner giving yeoman service in an effort to try to get us to a point where we now are, actually, with a paper fully prepared for the review and consideration by the social partnership when next it meets. But there are still players who, in my judgment, can do better. I've heard Mr. Branker have to speak this week to the banking community. I myself have had to speak this week about challenges that we see with respect to the banking community, who must be players equally. But the reality is that there are sometimes points in life when you have to speak truth to partners who are not pulling weight in a way that you would like them to pull weight. And the reality is that I am not satisfied that the banking community in Barbados is doing its best to try to offset some of these costs, and additional percentages added on to credit card transactions are finding a knock-on effect right through the system, and it is hitting the consumer hard, because at every stage of a process that then trickles on, and it is something that we have to speak candidly to and try to find a way of mitigating or blunting the effect of it. So there are a number of things that are at play here. If I could say to you at the very beginning that my ambition in this discussion would be not only to thank you for inviting me to participate in it and bring this esteemed panel together, because they got some good people on the call, but the reality is that I think we have to help Barbadians to understand the nature of the challenge that we are confronted with, and understand what is being done to shape a realistic and workable and strategic solution to some of the problems that we are confronting. And I would be happy to elaborate on this specificity as we go forward during the course of the evening.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Mr. Branker, I think that's a good point for you to jump in. You're obviously one of the ones in terms of your capacity as president of the chamber who would be seeing when these more expensive containers are coming in. And most consumers aren't, usually aware of these things. They're just seeing the higher price of whatever that commodity is on the shelf in the supermarket or the hardware store, wherever they're going. From your view, what's the approach that we have to be taking here?
Well, thank you for having me this evening, and Minister, thanks for the invitation. But before answering your question, I would want to, first of all, respond to the comments by the persons that were interviewed. The truth of the matter is that the retail section usually gets the brunt of the accusations, gouging for high prices. And I think the average Barbadian may not recognize that there was a study done back as far back as 1985 that suggested that yes, that our prices are actually affected by, by the external prices. The local prices are affected by external prices. But that study had found out that it only contributes maybe about 33% of the actual price. So there are a lot of local factors that are influencing the prices that we see on our shelves across various sectors. And therefore, I think that as Minister would said, at the partnership level, we are working together to bring players together to come to a position where each of us can contribute in a meaningful way to reduce. But every month, distributors, retailers are faced with increased prices from suppliers because as COVID has hit various markets and we have issues with different weather systems and all sorts of issues with various countries, we are faced with increased prices. But understand that whatever we get from external sources is compounded by the local market, by the situation that we have here, by the administrative bottlenecks that also contribute to the cost of doing business. And therefore, we have to put our heads together and not necessarily putting blame on the last person holding the baton, but clearly investigate and see what we can do to improve pricing in Barbados.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Marshall, I want to bring you in here now, sir, and get your views because we would also look to local manufacturing to help us in this situation as well, because we can't always rely on external goods. So anything that we can manufacture anything here, that's always a plus. What's happening in terms of the local manufacturing side of things?
Well, the local manufacturers were quite resilient during the COVID period, during the lockdowns, and they've been showing that they can adhere to the protocols and still deliver good value for their customers. And I just want to say that there's the situation with pricing in Barbados has been going on long before COVID, and it has only been heightened because of the global supply chain issues. Started because of COVID, and that the major global players in the world are now battling for the few goods that they are moving around, and of course we feel the brunt of that because we can't compete. But it really is something that had started long before us, and I do believe that there's no silver bullet here that can fix this for everybody. And I agree with everyone else on the call that's spoken so far that it's going to take a variety of sectors and everyone looking at what can be done in their particular area to try and bring prices down. I would specifically highlight, for instance, the ease of doing business. Within our neighborhood, we are ranked relatively well, but compared to Jamaica, for instance, we're quite far behind. And I would certainly encourage the government. I know that they're working very hard already, but I would certainly encourage them that certain things that they've looked at before in terms of the ease of doing business, note that was done a couple of years ago, and in terms of the policy that they're working on, that we really need to get a move on these things so that we can bring some stability and some longevity and foresight so that investors can feel that they can invest their money here. The industry isn't going to suddenly change on them within the next 2 or 3 years.
Okay, and Mr. Paul, now to bring you in here as well. Obviously, agriculture is a major part of what we do. If there's one thing that we need to do in this pandemic is continue to eat. We have to eat. What's been happening in your sector? Obviously, there's so many things: larceny, supply issues. We had Hurricane Elsa that had an impact too on some farmers and so on. What's happening in terms of the local farming community now? What are your challenges? What are the pluses?
Well, I would say that, first of all, good night to everyone. Thanks for bringing me on the panel. I want to say that the challenges are very similar in that, for instance, in the same way we hear persons in the retail sector complain about costs, farmers too do have a problem when it comes to the whole question of increasing costs. And especially in the last few years or so, what we have seen is that there has been a really big increase in the cost of production. And of course, we actually have to take on that cost and absorb it. And the other thing is to, as you have said, the other issues that we have historically faced, such as predatory larceny, those have not gone away. For instance, we know we've had the challenge of pests, especially in relation to the green monkey. These things have not gone away. So certainly, it has not been easy for the agricultural sector. The other point I wish to make that, we talk about the whole question of the ease of doing business. And I think really that in many cases, when we speak about it, we speak about it in relation to the whole question of imports. But I also want to tie the whole question into the fact that, I guess when I listen to the concerns of the Barbadians who spoke at first, it was that they want to know that basically that the prices that are being charged at the retail end are justified, and that in a sense, what also we must understand is that they are also a reflection of government of policies generally, and the makeup of those policies. So I think that we need to move away from the concept that really that somehow that the individual players inside there can just ignore the environment in which they're operating and just charge prices as they will. And sometimes, in many cases, it is what we have to do in the sector, or I guess in the case of the agricultural sector, in order to survive. And I think that is something I want to bring home to people, that basically that the prices do not arrive out of a hat. It is really a reflection of our socio-economic circumstances that are happening within the country at that particular point in time.
Okay, well, the opening strokes from each of my panelists tonight. We'll be back with more People's Business right after this break. Welcome back to the People's Business Live, where we're having a conversation on the cost of living. And I want to go to Minister Symmonds now. One of the things that seemed to be coming up when we opened just now was the cost and ease of doing business. And I know that this is something that is a personal issue for you in terms of, I know that there have been improvements in this because we've seen it in terms of the global index. But what would you say are those things that still need to be worked on, that are clearly still causing some problems in the system and some red tape, as the gentleman said? And what are the pluses? Where have we improved where that cost and ease of doing business is concerned?
We've had with respect to the the ease of doing business has been felt primarily in some of the I suppose the ways in which we have introduced the electronic platform into the central government's apparatus. so that you are doing a lot more things online than you could have done before. And that is a credit to the initiatives of the Ministry of Information and Smart Technology, where you for example, when you look traditionally at the ease of doing business things in Barbados, you see a lot of small irritants, I like to call them, popping up. But if you think it through, you realize that a person has to get up from his or her workplace desk and go, for argument's sake, to renew a driver's license historically would have been a visit to a central location. And then we know the story. Sometimes it is closed, or there's a problem, you got to come back another day, or you wait in line for a couple of hours, etc., etc. So that is but one example of the way in which we've used the electronic platforms in order to be able to better deliver services to people. I think that another area of significance has been that the new legislation with respect to town and country planning is more facilitative in nature, and instead of people having the constant run around that we have historically known town and country planning through the years, and I think Mr. Marshall is correct. Some of these things are not brand new at all. Some of these things have been a legacy of Barbados's evolution from generation to generation. So that town planning, from the time I was a little boy, I was hearing that town planning was a problem. And part of what we think we've achieved now has been to come to a point where town planning is more of a facilitator. If you have a challenge, then you can find out what your challenge is very easily, what steps you need to take in order to facilitate the delivery of the permission, rather than you just wait indefinitely to hear that there is no permission. Certainly, again, in my ministry with respect to energy processes, we have accelerated the process substantially of being able to deliver renewable energy licenses. And again, that is also a work in progress as you attempt to fine tune the thing. I think that what we have to accept with respect to the ease of doing business, when you study the reports, they all speak to a process. In other words, you don't ever arrive at a destination and say, okay, we have achieved ease of doing business. You want to systematically review and then review again over and over the things that you are doing in any given country, whether it be with respect to planning permission, opening bank accounts, being able to connect water, being whatever area it might be, to be in a position that you are able to say that the efficiency with which you have done it has improved, or alternatively, it is disimproving or remaining stagnant. And the ambition obviously is to get better and better as you proceed. So that I hope that I've answered your question. The challenge that we have is to make sure that every department of government is as facilitative as possible, and that equally the people in the private sector who must work with government in order to help to facilitate other types of activity in the economy, because there is a partnership that government has with the private sector in almost everything. So that in some instances, the challenge is not just that there is just a problem in a government department. Sometimes it is that there has to be a synergy built between the government department and the private sector department, or the private sector institution, that allows for the investor or the Barbadian person who is just simply trying to do business to have a better deal. One example of that, again, can be seen easily if I use an example from my ministry. The Ministry of Energy is not the Barbados Light and Power. But if you wanted a renewable energy license today, you have to be able to deal with a number of contact points. First of all, you have to go through the Ministry of Energy. But equally, the Government Electrical Engineering Department, which is located in the ministry responsible for public works, is another stop that you must make. Equally, in some cases, especially for larger investments, the Town and Country Planning Department, and similarly, the Barbados Light and Power. Now, it is quite frequent that the Ministry of Energy has done all it has to do, but then has to maintain a step that ensures synergy with town planning. And equally, that we have to maintain a synergy with the light and power on the other side. And wherever there is that lack of synergy and the system falls out of sync for whatever reason, then the person out there, you, Ryan, who is trying to make the application, a company that you have set up or a party to who are making the investment, the banking community who are seeking to back you financially, there will be a knock-on effect for them as a result of that inability to maintain the synchronicity of the steps. And that is really where the biggest challenge is. It has traditionally been discussed very loosely in Barbados. Well, the government has to get its act together. We accept that. I don't shy away from that at all. But it is a larger issue. And sometimes it comes down to a business culture in this country, of which the private sector is very guilty as well. We tend not to hit the accelerator or keep our foot on the accelerator and be as competitive as other players do in the world. And that is a problem. In fact, quite frankly, when it happens in larger institutions, and I hate to appear in this program to be beating up on the banking community, but when you see a few people in a bank on a Friday and a line a mile long, it is a frustration to small business people all across Barbados. It is a frustration to the agricultural sector who are on a Friday are trying to put themselves in a position in large measure to do vending of their products and so on a Saturday and so on. The commercial connection to the agriculture sector must be facilitated by that private entity called the banking community. And so I hope I'm painting the picture of the holistic nature of the problem here. Yeah. And in some ways, this country has to get its business culture correct. And that business culture...
Ryan, I hope you could allow me...
Yeah.
Ryan, I hope you could allow me to come in there.
Okay, go ahead. I have a caller on the line, but I'm going to let caller make his call question or comment, and then I'm going to let you jump right in. Caller, please go ahead. Go ahead, caller.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Mr. Symmonds, and good night to the panel. Now, Minister Symmonds, you have agreed with me already in another place about something I'm going to say here. Now, I can't understand for the life of me why dolphin, where you do not have to go and do anything in the sea, should be $10 a pound. And you agree with me in another forum as regarding this. Now, I'm going to give you another one out tonight that is pretty startling. You see all the ash that was around? The ash was sold as an area for $7 a pound. A big entity went in and bought all, and they sell at $25. These are the sort of things that we can do at home. Don't let's deal with the container and the big international situation yet. Let us start with a solution with the small things that we can do at home first, and then go forward. I understand the situation with the freightage in the sea and the container. I understand all that. But let us start with hit it on the ground, running with what we can do here first. Now, Mr. James Paul, you said this week that there's a hike in price and it's not renowned to the farmers, etc. I want to hear you on that too. I would hate to think that after all is said tonight, that there'll be exercise in fertility. Because let me say to you, my next birthday will be 69, and it come way long. I remember in 60s, a person messed around with some president they were charged like $700-800 back in the 60s. If the record research, they can say, well, yes, we're all you're right. And there's a whole set more that I can say about price gouging is a situation, and I want to close on this. I would hate to think that somebody would think that somebody invests money not to make money. But there's a demarcation. When you go past that demarcation, where price gouging sets in, you have to deal with players that can really do better. I regard you for.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let you, Mr. Branker, now respond to the comments from Minister Symmonds just now.
Not necessarily a response. I just wanted to bring it home as how the ease of doing business or the lack of ease of doing business can indeed affect pricing in Barbados. I want to pay tribute to the Comptroller of Customs, who has been doing an excellent job in bringing Barbados online with the Asikuda World System. But I know personally that the Comptroller and his team has been trying their effort best to be able to move goods through the port as seamlessly and quickly as possible using their risk management resources. But at the same time, there are other government entities that operate through the port that has not been able to match the pace of the customs department. And what happens is that we importers on a daily basis are faced with a charge called demurrage charges. And these demurrage charges are charged by the shipping lines. So imagine that a container arrives on a Monday, and by Thursday morning, you have to start paying per day on that container and you also have to pay throughout a weekend. So understand any delays in getting containers out of the port is an additional cost to importers that at most times they cannot afford to absorb. And so the ease of doing business, or the lack thereof, as I said, is something that we need to look at in a very serious way, because it is indeed affecting pricing in Barbados.
So that's where it would come in then at the consumer level. All of those things adding up to what I would lift up and look at the butter or whatever that I'm looking at on the shelf, and the prices up from last week. Okay.
And the price and the demurrage charge on a cold storage container, if you're having butter, is way higher than a dry box.
Wow.
Ryan, if I could, I would
ahead.
just want to venture here just to suggest that I know it is not by any stretch of the imagination a quick fix solution, because the work has really only begun a couple of months ago. But we are working on the creation of what is called an electronic single window. Again, it is another digital web-based solution. And what we were trying to do really is to bring to one platform all of the different areas, all of the departments of government that are involved in the importation process, so that you will have in one place everybody who is a player, whether it is port health, whether it is the people who deal with veterinary and plant safety, those sanitary and phytosanitary considerations, those people who are involved in every aspect of the importation process that have to give licenses and permissions and so on into one place, so that we can, in a more seamless way, get as many as 28 agencies, I think it is, of government that have to be onboarded and interface with each other so as to accelerate this problem. And Mr. Branker's observation is quite right. There are times when you are bouncing from one department of government to another, and the test takes a few days. And the charges, especially in this COVID environment, are going through the roof. And so as to tighten that, we have to do the necessary work. It is by no stretch of the imagination an easy undertaking. We have UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, as the consultant, and they obviously are perhaps the best in class in terms of structuring these types of things, with a lot of experience. But they are working with us now with a view to trying to overcome that particular hurdle.
Okay, Mr. Marshall, I want to give you an opportunity to come in on this. In terms of inputs in the local manufacturing sector, are you seeing some of these things as well?
Certainly. Well, in terms of the general raw materials, the purchased goods, when COVID started, a lot of businesses around the world basically liquidated their commodities and reduced their inventories, and the global economy came back faster than they thought, and it really created a challenge, as most of those larger economies took up that material. And of course, supply and demand, as the demand went up, the prices went up with it. And what we're seeing now is that that has kind of plateaued to some degree, but certainly the shipping and logistics and so on are a significant concern for us, as was mentioned before. I mean, we're seeing increases. They were mentioning 20-foot containers, but we've seen increases in containers out of China going from as little as $4,000 up to $25,000.
Wow.
And you can appreciate what that would do to the inputs that we have to deal with. So I would certainly consider that a lot of the manufacturers have done their level best to try and mitigate the impact on the consumers. And the supply and demand model allows for that to happen. Obviously, nobody will able to price gouge as long as there's competition. So it's something that we manage, but that's very sustainable, and we certainly expect that the current situation with shipping and so on will hopefully resolve itself within about 8 to 12 months.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have to go to break now, but Mr. Paul, I'm going to let you respond to Raw when we come back on this edition of The People's Business. Welcome back to this edition of the People's Business Live, where the topic is the cost of living. Now, before we went to the break, I was going to allow Mr. Paul to come to respond to a caller that we had earlier, because we do have another call on the line. Mr. Paul, really quickly, could you respond to Carlos' comments? I mean, he was talking about fish, for example. I mean, some people might not consider the inputs, but I am seeing a lot of higher prices where fish and other things are concerned.
You know, the thing is, though, that we have to be realistic in Barbados in terms of we do trade in a particular way. And at the beginning, I did indicate that if you have constructed your trade and relationship with countries in one way, as a result, we expect, for instance, you know, we hear the talk about the whole question of fixing things, and we pretend that maybe if we say increase our ease of doing business, somehow magically prices will increase. But do we also talk about the fact that yes, we import, but also to what also contributes to the cost of goods is the fact that we in truth and in fact, we don't export enough. So, for instance, if when we sent back up containers to countries, that we did have something to send back up to those countries, it would at least mitigate against the high cost of the containers in the first place. Things like these, and going back again to the agricultural sector, I think that we live in this environment. That is why sometimes I believe that when I hear people talk about the whole question of prices, again, when it comes to agricultural commodities, we actually feel the impact of those increases. For instance, the recent increase that we saw in the price of feed, which I know a lot of Barbadians cannot understand why. But for instance, when you have a major commodity, and I think we need to understand that we are part of a world economy, we're not separate from it, we are part of it. So when a major ingredient, for instance, such as corn, doubles in price on the world market, and corn goes into every thing that you could think about, even some of the things that consumers think do not have in corn, it goes into corn. When a major ingredient like that goes up on the world market and doubles in price, we seem to think that somehow we should be insulated from this. In other words, it will not have any impact on here. But it will have an impact. And I think that in a sense that we have to do some amount of education in terms of help people to understand what needs to happen, but also too, we need to do something at the level of our own economy in terms of the whole question of agriculture and development to try to mitigate the impact of increases in food prices, so that, for instance, we have options, and that is the other problem. We don't have any options.
Okay. Do we still have the caller on the line? Caller, if you're on the line, please go ahead with your comment or question. Good night.
Good night. My call is directed to Mr. Symmonds. Now, in 2018, the NSRL was removed. We, as Barbadians, did not see a reduction in prices. And in the mini budget of 2018, the Prime Minister said that the Fair Trading Commission would have done a study to determine whether there was any significant reduction in the price of commodities after the removal of NSRL. We have not seen or heard of that report. Mr. Symmonds, you had stated a few weeks ago that a study was undertaken as regards price gouging, and you would soon disseminate the information to the Barbadian public. We are still waiting on the dissemination of that information. As regards price gouging, I can say to you that, take for example, in the height of COVID, importers were selling medical masks here at $126, $156 a box. And I was told before COVID that those masks used to sell for much, much lower. What I did, I wanted to test the market. I brought in some masks from China, paid UPS to bring them in, and test the market at $70 a box as compared to between $126 and $156. Now, those people would have brought in their masks by boat, which would be much cheaper than if you bring them by plane. So something is wrong that you're telling me that there is no price gouging in Barbados. I recognize that you are in it to make a profit. But do the research. The apiculture system is there, and the government can get the information it wants to determine what is the landed price of these commodities, what the duties and other charges are, and what those commodities are being sold at on the market, and hence you can get your information if you really want it. What questions are direct at Mr. Symmonds?
Mr. Symmonds.
Hi, thank you, caller. Let me begin by trying to clarify that which you call a statement that said I would do some research on price gouging. What in fact I did say was that I am not entirely prepared. I'm not prepared to go out on a limb. I won't say entirely. I'm not prepared to go out on a limb at all on this question of price gouging. I felt so then and I feel so now. And that what we had to do was to have a study of price movements in Barbados. Now, just say that now we have in fact done the study on price movement. On this call is Mr. Branker of the findings that we have. And in fact, we have not only shared it with him in his capacity as the Chamber of Commerce. It is a study that has evolved beyond, has gone into the energy sector. So we're looking at petroleum prices. Happy to discuss that with you as well. We are also looking at the general movements, for example, in the hardware store prices and so on. And in that study, we have also posited some solutions. The solutions have come from government departments which have been involved in the study. For example, the Ministry of Economic Affairs, the Ministry of Labor, and indeed the ministry that I hold. And equally, we have benefited from solutions proposed by the private sector. Mr. Branker and I have shared another platform where we have discussed at some length these solutions. So the reality is that the study was in fact done. The business community is in possession of the findings of the research. We are at the point where we are meeting at the level of the social partnership in the not too distant future. And I could say to you, caller, that the social partnership is on whatever particular day of this month, the Prime Minister of Barbados must convene the meeting of the social partnership. She is chair. As you know, the social partnership is made up of the labor movement. They too are the study, and they have had an opportunity to contribute to it as well. The social partnership is made up of the private sector, as I just said, and they, as I indicated, have also benefited from the study and have contributed. It is matter for the social partnership in full. I believe Mr. is also, I believe I've seen Mr. Paul at the meetings of the social partnership. But we are supposed to sit down and deliberate on this in a mature way. And again, I started by saying tonight that the solution, in my judgment, lies in us having strategic and carefully thought through solutions. It is very tempting, caller, to say that there's price gouging. I do not want to come across as being protective of unscrupulous business people, because there are some people in business who are in fact being unscrupulous. But I do not know that it is fair to the majority of businesses in Barbados to say that they are price gouging. In fact, some of the movements that we have seen in international prices are borne out, as James quite correctly said just now. We are seeing prices here because we largely are price takers. When it comes to a container, for example, 4 times more today to get that empty container to Barbados before you put anything in it. That container to be sourced is 4 or 5 times more than it was a couple of years ago. But when you are absorbing those prices and passing it on to the Barbadian consumer, and we are in that position largely because we have nothing to export in order to offset some of the cost of the container. And those are the challenges structurally to our economy that we have to be prepared to face and to fix. frankly, so that I don't want it to be said that, I don't know what you did with the mass you're talking about, sir. I hear you, I regard you, I accept that.
Let me respond to that, Minister. Let me respond
Go
to
ahead.
the issue with the
Go ahead.
mass. Because you see,
Yeah.
the average consumer listening to the caller would think, oh, look at the difference. But mere fact that you could send mass by courier and get them here at $70 in a matter of a week or week and a half cannot be compared to an importer who would buy a container of mass that the lead time that it takes for him to be able to get the container to sail is at least 2 months, and the sailing period from China to Barbados is another 3 or 4 months. So therefore, you cannot make a comparison between the price that you would buy that the importer would have bought in the heat of COVID trying to get masks on island 6 months earlier with you going online and buying masks from shipping them here by courier to get them 2 weeks here later. There's no comparison.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Branker. I believe we have a caller on the line. Good evening. Go ahead, caller, with your comment or question.
Good afternoon.
Hi, good night.
Good night.
Go ahead.
I would like to speak to the minister, Symmonds, or the businessman on the phone.
Go ahead, sir. Go with your comment or question.
Right. I have a small business. I normally will put in $100 will carry me for 7 days. I'm noticing now that I am paying $200 a week. That is $800 a month. I heard the minister in the ministry of with the Prime Minister Ryan Strong said the government has to make money, and he was talking in relation to the fuel cost. Fuel is killing us. And don't really tell me that people there that have those trucks and some of those big vehicles that the engines are bigger than mine are going to drive those vehicles too for free, because all of them must be feeling the fuel cost that has gone on, and it's going to help drive up everything regards to what we say. Nobody on the panel is addressing it because it's an issue that people are ducking. But I ain't ducking it. I facing reality. The $375 a year on the license to get the sticker on the thing, they remove that. Now I paying $200 a week from $100, right? How soon you will get to three? You won't take too long to get $375 that will cover the fuel thing. It's a lot more than that. You're paying a lot more than that in gasoline. It's ridiculous. We're the third highest country in the world that paying for gasoline. The third highest country. Only two other places in the world gasoline more cheaper than Barbados. It's ridiculous.
Okay,
you can't have your say.
So okay, I'm gonna allow the panel to respond, but we have to take a break here really quickly, and we'll be back with more of your people's business in just a moment. Welcome back to the People's Business Live, where the topic is the cost of living. And we're going to go to that caller's question or comment just now about the cost of fuel. And Minister Symmonds, I know this is something that you would have responded to before. Obviously, we're not an oil producer. Hopefully, we will be soon. But obviously, this is something that comes up because of the price of oil in terms of how that affects us. And I know that we're pushing to be a green economy in another about 10 years or so or less. But really, what more can we do? We know that the price, it always seems to go up more than it comes down when it comes to fuel.
I welcome the caller's call. It is a very relevant call, and I want to say it truthfully, it is a heartfelt thing. I begin by making the point that there's not a lack of sensitivity on the part of government, certainly not on the part of this minister. I have to go to the petrol pump like anybody else, and I price as is paid by the caller, or in fact anybody on this call, or you yourself, Ryan, whoever. There's no special privilege, so I understand it. The fact of the matter is that prices are a key factor in Barbados's inflation. There's a very close relationship or correlation between domestic prices that we pay and the movement of international fuel prices. There's approximately a 1 to 2 month lag between the price increases that you see on the international market and what you are experiencing at your pump here in Barbados. It is almost identical in terms of the change in prices. We do not purchase raw crude, we purchase refined crude. So when you see a price of international crude oil, you're talking about raw crude generally, and ours is going to be a little bit more expensive because it is already refined when it comes here. But if you do an assessment over the last 3 years, and while I accept the emotion behind the prices movements that we are seeing, I fully accept and understand it. I want us now to apply, as the Prime Minister would say, our hearts to reason and to wisdom. If you compare prices today with, let us say, 2018 September, so September 2018 to 2021 September, domestic fuel prices back in September of 2018 were approximately $3.96. I think it may have been in June, it reached $3.06. I don't have the exact figure at my fingertips, but around June of 2018, it reached $3.96 a liter for gasoline. Today, we are paying $3.98 a liter for gasoline. So after the 3 years have passed, it is virtually dollar for dollar. What transpired was that there was a diminution in the cost of fuel. It decreased sharply when we went into COVID shutdown, and you will recall well, global travel halted, maritime travel, that's the ships on the sea, stopped sailing, whether they're recreational shipping or shipping for the purposes of business and industry. Air traffic virtually came to a halt, and there was a cessation of demand. So there's no demand for crude. Crude oil falls dramatically on the international market, and the cost of crude and the cost of oil in Barbados also fell. Then it would have started to rise again. I think it went down to about $2.80, and subsequently it started to rise again after the economy started to reopen and business started back and so on after global shutdowns, again induced by COVID. Now, what callers must understand out there is that there has been a sharp rise in the increase. In January of this year, we're paying 70% less than what we pay today to source our crude oil or imported oil or energy product. That which we import to Barbados has increased by about 70% between January and today. Now, it therefore means that what we are seeing at the pump is a reflection of that increasing cost. And I know for a fact that today we are paying $3.98 because it was in September 1st that figure came across my desk. and it will be on October 1st that the Ministry of Finance and so on will reflect whether that rises or whether that drops. On the last occasion, I believe it dropped by as little as 1 cent. Now, the tax structure, however, in Barbados, and this is the important point I want to get to, the tax structure in this country with respect to petroleum products has not changed. So while I understand that there is a painful reality every time I go to the gas station, I also have to accept that, and I'm speaking now specifically to the point that the column made about us being, and I hear this figure being bandied about, we are perhaps the most expensive or the second or third most expensive in the world, and so on. I have no evidence to support that. What I can tell you about our tax structure is that it is a very transparent one, and I will share it with you now, Ryan. It begins with the fact that these taxes are constituted through a number of ways. First of all, we have an excise tax. Now, the excise tax in Barbados is about 99.39 cents per liter. And this is an area where, in the same report that the previous caller invited me to comment on, that is an area where we are prepared to make recommendation. In fact, we've made the recommendation to the social partnership that that is an area where we feel we can claw back in the interest of the consumer so that we reduce the excise with a view to making it easier for the consumer at the pump. It is a matter not for me as minister, but for the social partnership to agree that this is an area where they feel, or where it is felt collectively, that we can go forward in that regard. In addition to that, the pricing structure also includes a fuel tax, which is 40 cents on the liter. Now, I want to say here again, the fuel tax replaced road taxes, which historically the same caller who was just there would have had to pay for his vehicle. I know I paid road taxes. And the reality is that the absence of the road tax now means that there is a flexibility built into the driver of a vehicle, the owner of a vehicle. In many circumstances, if you're using your vehicle for business, I understand that you don't have that flexibility. I get cussed up on social media for this, but I have to say, we have some flexibility as owners of, and users of private vehicles. On Saturday, as yesterday, I was doing some things in my constituency, and I was not using my vehicle. For much of the time that I was there, my vehicle was being worked on for maintenance, so that I was using somebody else's vehicle who was with me. So the gas that we use, I am paying for. That is part of the flexibility. You control the amount of which you drive. And part of what we can now do to help us get past these challenges is to have serious discussions in Barbados, in my judgment, about things like carpooling and about the way in which we conserve energy. The other component on the tax structure is the value-added tax, and that too has not changed. The excise of 99.39 cents per liter and the value-added tax at 17.5% were consistent from the day this government was elected to the point where we are talking tonight. None of them have changed. So if there has been no movement in excise, no movement in VAT, and the fuel tax just simply replaces what you would otherwise have had to pay in road tax, then you can't blame government's taxing structure for the escalation of prices which we have seen over the last 10, 11 months. What we have to point to is the fact that there has been a reduction in the cost of oil and the cost of fuel at the pump, and it is now climbing again in consonance with the changes in the international community, where the price that we are sourcing from is also decreasing. I think we have to speak in solutions, right? Permit me to say so very quickly. In the pricing structure is also a marketer's margin. That is the margin that the big players get. Sol and Rubis, they are the marketers. And we feel that in the interest of what the economists call burden sharing, that there should be a reduction in the same way government is proposing to say we will claw back in the interest of helping consumers, claw back on the excise so that the consumer gets the benefit of not paying as much excise, or perhaps none at all. The Minister of Finance will have to decide that. Equally, that Sol and Rubis, as marketers, must now also share a little bit of the burden and reduce their profit margin by a few cents. That is what we have proposed in the meeting for the paper for the social partnership. It is no secret to those people who have been working on this matter that this minister feels that way, and certainly the social partnership will be asked to deliberate on these things once they meet at the end of hopefully at the end of this month. As I said, the date has not been set. I cannot set that date. That is for the Prime Minister to do. But all the work that we needed to do has been done. I've already thanked Mr. Branker and his people for contributing to the paper. The labor movement has been involved in this process as well. The social partnership just has to sit down and deliberate on these matters and let us settle how we are going to treat these things in the interest of all of Barbados collectively. I can't put it any more candidly or transparently than that.
So, Minister, then potentially some hope then when that social partnership meeting happens, hopefully before the end of this month, correct?
One must hope, yes. Okay. But those are the facts. Those are the pricing structures. And you know, if you don't pay road tax, if you're paying fuel tax instead of a road tax, you're easily saying then that your price, yes, if you compare it to a country where road tax is being paid, well, you got 40 cents on the liter that man doesn't have to pay. But let us be fair about it, because he may be paying road tax, and so his fuel might be a little cheaper, but he's paying road tax. There was a time when we in Barbados did that. It is not for me to say which system is better, but I have to be clear that people must understand that the taxing structure in the country has not changed. The prices have moved because of international reality, and the proposal is to shield the consumer from that international impact by way of using the excise tax as the point at which we roll back the taxes. So you remove some of the excise.
Okay, we're moving rapidly to the break, but I'm going to take a caller really quickly. If the caller is still on the line, go ahead, caller, with your comment or question.
Yes, I'm back here. I want to speak to what Mr. Branker said about masks coming by air as opposed to coming by boat. I want to tell Mr. Branker that I also brought in some masks from China by boat. And I know the cost of landing the commodities here. I know a gentleman just bought in a container of masks from China, and they landed here at $8.21 a box. He sold some to a friend of mine, so I know what I'm talking about. Just do not dismiss my presentation as if I do not know what I'm talking about. I know about market research.
Caller, you clearly can't compare the price of masks now with in the heat of COVID back in March, April last year.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Branker. We do have to take a break really quickly. We'll be back with more of your People's Business Live and your comments and your questions. 228-5562, 228-5563. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to the People's Business Live, where the discussion point tonight is the cost of living. And I want to bring in Mr. Marshall, the president of the BMA. Now, Mr. Marshall, I've noticed around Barbados that we're seeing a lot more photovoltaic systems Some companies are actually putting out electric vehicle fleets now. Are these some of the things that manufacturers are doing now in terms of offsetting some of those same fuel costs we're just talking about, or what are some of the other things that you've been doing to mitigate those costs?
Well, obviously, energy is a significant part of any process, and I would say though that a lot of the investment that has gone into it from the manufacturing sector and others is primarily to create a source of energy that can withstand some of the global shocks. Installing photovoltaics and other systems are not cheap, and they're not necessarily geared towards creating cheap energy, but more along the lines of mitigating any risk from any major shocks. And Barbados has a very good track record with regards to using the sun. A lot of people we probably don't sing enough about it, about how much we have used the sun to heat our water. And this is something that's been going on for decades, and we were able to manufacture, be able to do that. And I think as we go into more PV systems, which obviously is a much more industrial setup, but in terms of the generation of electricity or even in the storage of it, that there's opportunity there for manufacturers to actually be a part of that process. In terms of manufacturers and helping to keep the costs down, as everyone has been saying, there's a lot of different elements here in trying to keep the costs down. And if, for instance, we were to take a very simple scenario that we wanted to reduce the average cost of the basket of the goods or typical hardware items or anything down by 30%, it's going to take a variety of things. It's going to take ease of doing business. It's going to take lower energy. It's going to take working with the labor. It's going to take looking at how to create a long-term industrial policy so that investment flows into the system to try and make manufacturing more efficient. It's going to take everything to try and get that done, and I just want to let the government know, and certainly from the other private sector members, that we've been done for a lot of extremely smart people have worked very hard to create the policies that they're working on, and we just want to encourage them to put the resources in place to try and make those things go faster so that we can get the investment that we need to try and get the efficiencies in place.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Paul, what in terms of the agricultural side, what's happening there? Are the farmers getting their produce sold now, and are there any challenges in terms of getting produce sold?
I would answer that question, but I also want to bring up something that I think that the minister referred to in terms of fuel. One of the observations that have been made by farmers, even since the increase in fuel prices, is that before, farmers were being given fuel at a concessionary rate. I think it was more concessionary. And now, for instance, you find that the gap that existed before for, say, I would say productive enterprises that, say, utilize diesel has been removed and is being treated like everything else on the market. And I think that one of the things that if we are serious about trying to at least make our local food producers more competitive, I really think that we need to examine how we can actually help to empower them by at least making the cost of operating more affordable. Because we talk about the whole question about the way in which we do business and make it more efficient. I think that one of the things is that you need to be realistic and at least put your local productive sector at least in a position where they can compete in the market. And I think that one of the unfortunate things that's happened over the years is that some of the costs, for instance, we thought fuel is not the only one. You look at the whole question of water. I mean, I know that issue is being looked at the moment, but certainly when you look at some of those critical cost elements that goes into the cost of local production, they have increased astronomically. And as a result of that, it has had an impact on the profitability of our local agricultural sector, I suppose, manufacturing too at the same time. But I think we have to be realistic in this whole question of the impact that we have seen as a result of the changes in the way in which we have are charging for diesel, and the fact that the productive sectors, which before I believe were given some type of at least leeway to at least be able to produce at a more competitive level, that is not the case now. And therefore, going back to the question that you are asking me about the prices that we're charging right now, and I would say this, that despite the fact that we have seen increases in cost on the part of agriculturalists, they have still been able, even despite all of those things, to be able to maintain the cost at a relatively reasonable level. I mean, when you look, I recently, we were looking at the products that are being produced right now. Cucumbers, for instance, is a commodity that is in the market now, and they are selling, in some cases, or wholesaling at as well as 50 cents a pound. Now, I'm saying that when you look at even the fruit and vegetable sector in Barbados, we have not seen the type of increases in costs at the level of local products, that is, for instance, that you would have seen in other areas. And I really want to say that sometimes when I hear comments on the whole question of food price increases, I think that we are living in two different worlds. Because on the other hand, you have the agricultural sector, which by and large, if you look at over the past 10 to 12, even 15 years, they have been able to maintain their prices at relatively stable levels. I even go, for instance, to the whole question of the dairy industry. The dairy industry has not seen, local dairy industry that is, has not seen any increases in costs for the past 10 to 12 years. None. And in other words, farmers have been having to live on the fact that they have increases in costs, water, fuel, whatever you're talking about, whatever inputs. But on the other hand, they have not been able to see increases in the price of their final product. The same thing applies to poultry. And these are things I think that if we are going to be serious in terms of addressing the whole question, I want to look at it from a different angle. Because if we in Barbados are able to produce our food at even more competitive prices, at the end of the day, consumers will benefit, and not only consumers will benefit at the end of the day, but also will have employment benefiting too at the same time, because Barbadians will be able to employ them. But what is the sense sometimes of, we have those persons who will wish to import everything under the sun, under the guise that it is cheaper. But of course, that cheap product that is being produced, we keep on saying, is a subsidized product in those other countries that they're talking about. And I think that if we are serious about trying to, in some ways, tackle the whole question of prices in a fashion that will have impact on ordinary Barbadians and even on the local economy, I think we have to look to see what is it that we are doing locally that are driving up the cost for local producers and then putting them at a severe disadvantage to the products that are being imported at the same time. And I say that is an issue sometimes that needs to be addressed. Even, for instance, we talk glibly, yes, about the whole question of, for instance, utilizing more of our local products in our institutions. And I know the government has moved in terms of, especially school meals. We know that, for instance, they are buying more local products. But the thing is really, I believe that we can even do more in terms of trying to give our local producers the type of capacity, in other words, that they can actually, because of the overhead investment that's required, they can actually reduce the final price of that commodity to our consumers. But I believe that these are things that need to be addressed very quickly if we are to see our local agricultural sector being competitive in terms of what is there at the moment.
Okay, thank you, sir. I actually want to ask you to give me a short list of things that you think we could actually stop exporting. I want to take this call really quickly. Stop importing, sorry. I want to take this call really quickly. Go ahead, call up your comment or question.
Hello, is it me that you're talking to about the question?
Yes, please. Go ahead quickly with a comment or question.
Yeah, what I was saying is I'm a small business, and since the COVID, the people that I used to service no longer come to Barbados. Now, I paid my NIS. I've had a one-off payment of $3,000. What am I supposed to do next? I decided that I'd have an Airbnb, so I was going to try and apply for a grant from the best program to help with build the Airbnb. I had the plans drawn out, and I heard them say that the town and country planning is quick. But I mean, it's been months, and I haven't even heard anything from the people who are supposed to get the plan approved. And also, We haven't had any money since the $3,000. What are self-employed people supposed to do?
Okay, thank you, sir. We're going to allow a response, but we have quickly to go to this break, commercial break. We'll be right back with more of the People's Business Live. Welcome back to this edition of the People's Business Library, where we have been talking about the cost of living. And I want to get straight to Minister Symmonds just to quickly address this question from the caller just now about town planning. I know this is an area where there have been some improvements. As far as you're aware of what's happening there, are things moving as they should?
Yeah, well, let me just speak directly to the caller's concern. When I was in the chair of minister, I came across challenges of that nature. It had been my practice to try to walk the individual through the different issues that they were confronted with. Obviously, I'm not there anymore, and it would not be within my purview to do that. But what I would recommend that he do is reach out to the Barbados Hotel Tourism Association and try to solicit their assistance as an Airbnb operator. Actually, the Airbnb also has its own association. It is perhaps a little bit less powerful than the BHTA, but between the two of those associations, he should be able to get the level of assistance and representation that will help take him through the network of challenges, navigate him through the network of challenges that he's referring to.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're at the final lap of the program, and we're going to give each of you an opportunity to give your final remarks, and you can be guided by a question I'll ask now, which is to generally in terms of export, what are we doing in terms of the export side of things? But I'm allow you to make your own general comments. For you, Mr. Paul, I want to know if there's a set of things, a set of agricultural products that you can look at right now and say, we could stop importing these things in Barbados tomorrow and the agricultural sector would have them covered.
But first of all, I would easily start with commodity and cucumbers. We can actually, with an organized program, grow all the cucumbers that we need on an annual basis. For instance, you talk about sweet potatoes. I mean, I think that there was a slight disruption last year, but I think really that we've shown that we can sort of produce things like sweet potatoes on a consistent basis. I mean, of course, I don't even need to mention poultry industry. I really think that we can produce 100% of the poultry that we need. And also, by the way, when it comes to consumer, I think pork is another area. Going back, for instance, to the fruit and vegetables, you look at, I think, onions. In other words, we need to have in the agricultural sector certain products that we target for expansion in terms of growth. And I believe that we will be able to produce. I think, though, that in addition to that, you do need some cooperation from other members of the private sector in order to achieve this. And that is why, in a sense, that we have to adopt a value chain approach, in that we have to work with our retailers, and yes, our retailers, okay, who to sort of facilitate that kind of relationship that we need between our farming community and our agricultural sector. In that regard, and I don't want to say that, sometimes we talk about this, and there are players in the retail sector, such as, for instance, a lot of the popular supermarkets, including Massey, including Carrollton and Emerald City, the Jordans, they actually do have relationships right now with our agricultural sector. But I think that what we need to see even more is a situation where that relationship deepens, so that, for instance, we get a better grip, first of all, as to what the needs are in terms of the retail sector, and that farmers themselves can be able to at least put that amount of energy in terms of growing those crops so that they can actually supply. And I think that is one of the big issues that we do have in terms of trying to ensure that we can supply the level of crops. But in truth and in fact, we can supply. But I just want finally to say something else. I know that the other point that's going to be raised in terms of the agricultural sector is the whole question of price. But you know, at the end of the day, one of the things that we have to accept for countries our size in the world is that generally we cannot compete with the much larger countries who produce a product which is subsidized. Many of the products that we receive here, and it's interesting that a gentleman talked about the fact that he was importing masks, but sometimes what they don't tell you is that some of these products that they get come under some kind of special government scheme, not down rate, so that, for instance, it is just a way of getting into your market, giving you a subsidized price. It's a way of market penetration strategy. But at the end of the day, if we do not maintain our capability to produce these items, we will end up at being price takers if we lose our capacity to produce. And I think that is where I want to rest on that one.
Okay, thank you. But I want to add those pomegranates. I don't know how the prices of those things in terms of the imported, and I know we grow them here. That's one is my personal piece.
We grow pomegranates, and one of the big things is that there are certain commodities. Same thing that you talk about pomegranates, that actually you throw the seed up there and they will grow. We need to have a committed program in this country to utilize the agricultural land that is there lying idle. And in terms of growing these particular commodities, and I just, I don't want to take up too much time, but also the point I want to make is this, that we have also though to be careful that we do not set up agricultural enterprises below the economic side, and that's just another issue that we could talk about.
Okay, all right, thank you, sir. Mr. Marshall, I want to bring you in quickly because we're running out of time. Any closing comments from you? Don't let me force you. You tell me. Where the topic is cost of living. You can your closing comments are yours, sir. Go ahead.
Certainly. Well, you started the question with the exports, and I'll say this. In terms of production capacity for manufacturers, obviously we're able to invest and try to make things more efficient, and in that way try to reduce costs and prices, providing we have a strong market. And that strong market could either be local or export. The issue for export is that for the local business to get the capacity it needs to become efficient, to be able to then be efficient enough to export, it needs the local market as well. So if we are, too open to a lot of the international companies, as same situation for the agricultural industry that are subsidized to bring their products in here with subsidies, it erodes the local market, and then it prevents the opportunity for growth for local manufacturers to be able to get to that capacity to be able to do the exports.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Branker, does it look like we may be in a higher price environment for a while, given what's happening with COVID in the foreseeable future, or is it possible that we might get some sunlight?
Well, Ren, I think I need to come in at this point to make to reveal what the actual analysis is saying to us. Minister Symmonds would have referred to some research that was done, and the trend analysis of prices over 93 categories of basic food items during the period January 2018 up until May 2021. Let me repeat that. 93 food categories across the period January 2018 to May 2021 basically suggested that there was no evidence of significant increases in food prices in Barbados. On the contrary, the prices of the majority of food items, roughly 76% of those products that were surveyed, declined or were lower than the same period in 2020. So I just wanted to put that out there because there has been a lot of accusations thrown at the business community. But the real evidence is suggesting that we do have instances of price increases, but certainly not scandalous price gouging where persons are just increasing prices for increasing prices. At this point is that if we want to have a serious discussion about pricing in Barbados, we need discussion around productivity in Barbados, because the business is driven significantly by labor. If we are having to employ more persons doing the same job purely because of lack of activity, it will drive costs up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Minister Symmonds, you get to hit the home runs, so to speak, with your closing remarks, sir.
Well, thank you, Ryan, once again for having me and allowing this opportunity for us to have this type of discussion. I think it is really important because people must understand. If you want to hear me on the question of export, I think that we are doing some things that we need to do. One of them that I'm particularly keen on seeing come to completion is the effort made by the Ministry of Agriculture right now to do what we call invest in sanitary and phytosanitary standards for the export of fish, for example, and other proteins in Barbados. We have a lot of chicken, we have a lot of fish, we have we can export protein-based products. To use the fish example, the challenge that we've had is that the European Union would tell you they would import all the fish Barbados produces, but the fish cannot come from off of an ice boat and then be on room temperature before it is packaged. It can't be boned and scaled unless it is in a minimum temperature zone. So the idea of the temperature changes is a problem for them, but it is a practice in our marketplaces. Specially designed stainless steel tables and wash down zones and so on have to be built out. And that obviously comes at a cost, but reality is they will not import if we're just cutting up fish on the traditional wooden bench or desk or tabletop that has been used throughout the years in our fish markets. Similarly, standards generally are an issue for industry, not only agriculture, but manufacturing. And I know that I'm going to have to speak to the Small Business Association this week on this matter. There's a need for our businesses to understand that receiving markets expect a certain minimum standard for us. Mr. Marshall on this call knows this well. His company has achieved those minimum standards. Yeah. But there are a number of others who are fledgling, who are trying to climb that ladder, get to that export platform, but who are then frustrated because the standards that I must meet in order to be exporting to you, Ryan, I can't meet because I am not familiar with them or competent to reach those level of standards. And it is the role of government, in my view, to constantly be working with these folks in order to lift the quality of that which they do. The last point I want to make is to embrace 100% what James Paul said with respect to diesel. I drive a vehicle that is a diesel vehicle. It has nothing to do with agriculture. I go to the pump and I am going to pay the rate for diesel alongside the farmer who's driving the identical vehicle to mine. The challenge we have today is that we've allowed sports utility vehicles to come into this country and be treated while they're on the road for purposes other than agriculture. They're treated in the same way that we treat agricultural-based vehicles. I think the solution lies in us having a rebate on the diesel so that if you are able to demonstrate that you are working in the agriculture sector, and that's not a hard thing for people to be able to achieve, then you should be entitled to that rebate that would allow for that sector to get the stimulus that it needs. And I believe that that is a way in which we could go. It certainly is an area that I welcome further discussion on. It's one of the things I think the social partnership must deal with as well.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, panel. Gentlemen, Minister Symmonds, Mr. Branker, Mr. Marshall, and Mr. Paul, thank you, and thank you, viewers, for being with us tonight, where we will have been discussing the cost of living in Barbados. Apologies to callers who weren't able to get through. I am Ryan Broome, your presenter. Do have a good night and enjoy your week ahead.